Weird. Well, I think we're about ready to reconvene here. It looks like we've got a pretty good group assembled. If you didn't meet me already, I'm Krista McGaw, the Executive Director of Tecumseh Land Trust. And we are through our Jacoby partnership, which is a $3 million 5-year program that is designed by the Natural Resource Conservation Service out of USDA, but includes many local partners, one of whom is Arthur Morgan Institute for Community Solutions. One of the deliverables that they are helping us with through this project is to do these Growing Green conferences every year. We had to cancel last year because of COVID, kind of at the last minute, but we are so happy to have with us or back with us some of the wonderful speakers on ag economy and how to get more local economic value from agriculture that in fact is better for us in terms of the food that's produced, that adds value, that keeps dollars reverberating their effect in Ohio. So it is my privilege to introduce Leslie Schaller, who is in her role at ACEnet, a consultant really across the world on business incubation, particularly food and ag business. 5 incubators located at ACEnet, and they have continued on through COVID. I have been working for Tecumseh Land Trust now for 19 years. And Leslie, really, I'm trying to remember the first time I actually encountered her. We at one point had some good grant funding to bring Will Allen here in a year-long series that we kind of called Food Power. And with Will Allen's Growing Power in Milwaukee. And it was a very exciting year, a lot of good participation. Leslie kind of kicked it off with a panel that we had in Springfield at one point. And ever since then, I've known her as our go to tough love gal. Leslie will not lie to you about how easy it is to go local, with your ag, with your food products, with your economy. But she doesn't give up either. And she puts together the examples and shares them with us all. And we're just really so happy to have her with us today. We certainly enjoyed John Eichert this morning, had a really good panel. We're going to have more good panelists this afternoon who also are going to get to interact with us and with Leslie, and really put a very specific Ohio kind of spotlight in Southwest Ohio spotlight in our with our Grow Up in Gem City panel. So welcome, Leslie.
Great. Well, thank you, Krista, for that very, very generous introduction. I was also trying to think of when we maybe first met. So 20 years ago probably sounds about right. I, like many of our presenters today, I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation because I really need to be tethered at all times to the topic at hand. And it's really interesting that you guys have chosen this shift language. It's something that we've been thinking a lot about probably over the last 20, 30 years here in Appalachia, Ohio. So just a little bit of framing. I've been with the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks really since its inception as the worker-owned network in 1985. So we've talked a lot about the co-op movement here this morning, and I'm sure we'll do more here as we move through the agenda this afternoon. But that's always been sort of at the foundation of ACEnet's work. We broadened our scope in the early 90s when we started to open business incubator facilities. But really, since we started as the worker-owned network, we've always worked in the food and ag center. Southeastern Ohio, particularly the county of Athens, has been blessed with the most, I think, incredible farmers market. It's been in operation since 1972. it's continued to grow and evolve. So we've been partners along the way. And I think, for us, although we describe ourselves as a community-based economic development organization, we really believe in building more resilient economies. And we're probably non-traditional when it comes to other economic development partners. Although now, I think after all these years, or certainly the last 36 years of doing this work, a lot of our ideas that seemed fringe, maybe back in the 80s and even in the early 90s, I think are being embraced in new ways. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the subject at hand today. And that is, how do we prepare for this shift? Change can be really hard, not just for people, but for rural places particularly. We've been accustomed to doing things in certain ways, certain patterns, following certain behaviors. So a lot of times I've found for many years now doing this work is you have to approach it slowly and maybe sequentially, because change is not always easy. And I think this past year, I had hoped to be in person last year with you guys for this conference. And boy, it would have been great if we were all in the room together today. But we've seen this incredible disruption. And as John mentioned earlier in his presentation, and all the panelists right before lunch, COVID has really offered some, I think, both opportunities, but some incredible challenges in terms of how it's really disrupted supply chains across the US. So at the local level, I always call this sort of navigating creative abrasion. We want to do things differently. We're ready for that change. We're ready oftentimes to make those social or economic shifts, but there's a lot of tension involved. And one of the questions I keep asking people now since COVID is, are we food woke yet? As someone who's been banging that drum of local and regional ownership of a food system for many years, many decades now, I think COVID, if there has been a pandemic positive, has allowed us to kind of wake up to some of the challenges, for sure, some of the inequities within our food and ag system, but also some of the new opportunities. So if anything, I've seen a shift over time happening, but I see some interesting shifting that's happened over this last year. So who am I? Okay, thank you, Krista, for that wonderful introduction. But for the last 50 years, I've been living in Appalachia, Ohio. I came to school at Ohio University, headquartered in the city of Athens, in the fall of 1971 as a freshman. And I did my undergrad and grad work here, and I just couldn't leave. There's something about these foothills that just sing to me. And I think it goes back a couple generations ago when my grandparents also lived in southeastern Ohio. And although they migrated to Cleveland for economic opportunities, pretty regular story, I think, over the last 100 years as people migrate for various economic reasons. This region always seemed just really important in terms of what I valued, the vision I had for my life. So I was one of those back to the landers that John talked about in his talk this morning. I would now describe myself as a failed farmer, but I've raised livestock, I've gardened certified organic, I ran a truck farm and sold at the Athens Farmers Market for a while. But in 1985, because I always had to have another sort of daytime gig and worked in restaurants, I had the opportunity with 7 other quickly unemployed restaurant workers to start the Worker-Owned Restaurant Corporation. And I've been at that also since 1985. But I think at core, I really see myself as kind of this food system plus environmental activist. Prior to COVID, a lot of our focus, especially in our food system here in southeastern Ohio, has been trying to build out more resilience and sustainability as climate change really starts to weigh heavy, not just on our region, but nationally and certainly globally. The other thing I just want to draw attention to is back in 2010, other friends of mine, fellow travelers, I guess you might call them, Michael Schumann and Brad Massey and I embarked on what turned out to be about a year-long project. We had been contracted by a number of entities, especially investment from some of the nonprofits in the Cleveland area, to do a very in-depth study that we called the 25% shift. So it was looking at what are some of the benefits of food localization, looking at Cuyahoga County, particularly as sort of the market draw to rebuild local food and ag systems in that northeastern quadrant of the state. I also, during the Strickland administration, served on the Ohio Food Policy Council and learned a lot from that experience as well. This publication, you can Google it, and I go back and look at it every once in a while. I actually went back and looked at it again this week in preparation for this conversation with you folks today. And it's really kind of amazing at how many recommendations we made. They've probably been tweaked or adapted, but a lot of steps have been put in place in northeastern Ohio, and a lot of the recommendations still, I think, have substance in terms of looking at a possible roadmap. Whether you're at somebody's knocking on my window, as whether you're in a county or a region, you know, or in the state, or as we do a lot of work throughout Central Appalachia. So a couple reflections about ACEnet, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about our model when I get to the panel later this afternoon. But I tend to think that how have we accomplished this traction? We've really remade our local food economy here, and it's not happened overnight, and it's not, you know, by God, only by ACEnet. It's by hundreds and hundreds of partners and stakeholders at so many different levels. But I think, you know, one of the themes that we've heard today is our traction is really grounded in that intersection of trust and truth. And as Krista implied, I am a truth teller. Sometimes it's not always real happy going having a relationship with me, because I do call BS when I see it. But I think what we've been able to accomplish, especially as partners, is that we've learned how to travel at the speed of trust. And that allows us to get stuff done in new ways because we're pulling lots of different people together. And as this other photograph demonstrates, we celebrate, you know, those small wins, those successes, those explorations of things that are working. So I often refer to this, I have to have my sense of humor always intact, as rappelling over the edge of chaos, because this is longitudinal work. There's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of challenges to what we're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of speed bumps along, you know, that roadway between trust and truth. But some of the things that I'll share in terms of building trust that I think we've learned as partners is we really have to respect rural people and rural places. Whether it's been a lot of this unhealthy dialogue we've had in recent years at the national level, there's this skepticism and oftentimes this diminishing of what's happening in rural places, and almost this kind of concern or fear about what rural people are doing. And I think once you get to know what's happening in rural communities, you would be surprised at the level of ingenuity and innovation that's really occurring at all levels, not just in the food and ag economy. And I think what we've learned is you just have to embrace diversity. I like to say there's no one way, because we want to invite everyone to the table, and we're all not going to get along, and we're not all going to agree on what that roadmap, that pathway to the future looks like. And for us, it's been really meaningful to support leaders and leaders of all ages. We are surprisingly populated by many younger beginning farmers now in southeastern Ohio. And although I won't say that we can take credit for it as one or two or multiple organizations, I think we've been very focused on how do we make sure everyone is at that table, and how do we create economic opportunities for everyone. So ACEnet really practices this methodology that we refer to as network weaving. And that's really always kind of scanning the horizon, looking at, our communities, figuring out who the spark plugs are, and then connecting folks in networks for all sorts of different reasons. A lot of times just to get the support that they need. We've also been, I would say, pretty skilled in terms of mediating and just not shirking from conflict. Again, if you're going to be transparent, if you're focused on inclusion, if you're trying to look for ways to have a more diversified system, a more diversified business model, then again, you've got to be, I would say, a good communicator and really help people mediate conflict when it comes up and face it head on. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we really focus on resilience. We recognize that this is not going to happen overnight, that we need to build a system that has long-term impacts, that it's something that, again, is that intersection of policy oftentimes, but also personal behavior shifts. So thinking about those shifts. Okay, so intersection with truth. Well, let's acknowledge food systems are complex. Corporate interests oftentimes supersede what community needs and priorities are. Even in our long-term work, working with market partners and trying to get some of those corporate giants to source more local food from area farmers or local food processors. Those corporate interests, they might be partners for you for a while, but their priorities shift. And a lot of times it's the financial interests that weaken that supply chain that we're trying to turn into a local food value chain. The other challenge in rural areas that we face is we've been depopulated for generations now. So keeping our young people, attracting beginning farmers, especially as more and more of our average family farmers maybe age out or are looking for some sort of land and farm transition, hence land trusts, what a great tool. Depopulation is a concern. Although I will say that I think with COVID, and certainly we saw this during the 2008 recession, there's more folks who are maybe thinking about an exodus from their metropolitan or suburban location, and whether they were raised in the hills here of Appalachia, Ohio, or they're folks who, for whatever reason, maybe they are alums from Hocking College or OU. I think we're going to see some in-migration here, especially within the opportunities that our food and agricultural economy can offer. And then, as John said, farm practices have had significant damage on our natural environment. So there's a lot of remediation. Regenerative agriculture certainly offers, I would say, a new direction. And not just in terms of sort of the environmental value, but also looking at the overall economic model as well. And then this is very painfully true in our region. We are just historically entrenched generation after generation in a high percentage of poverty for our residents, for our families. So food insecurity, if anything, has just been even intensified during this past year with the COVID pandemic. But I think at the root core, we just haven't addressed why food insecurity is so prevalent. And this is, of course, in all aspects of our society. It's not just in rural places, but it's particularly difficult sometimes in our rural townships and villages where there isn't easy access to affordable, fresh, healthy foods. So a lot of what I think we want to have dialogue about today is, coming to terms. How do we build trust? How do we come together? How do we face the realities of some of these inequities within the food and ag system? So I just like to, one of the questions earlier, and I think Paul did a good job, and all the speakers did a good job kind of talking about it. We just need to come to terms with your role at any point in your life. I've been at this for a long time, in 2 years, remarkably. I don't know how it happened. I will turn 70. So I think there's again, as I say, there's no one way. There's ways to contribute in all phases of our lives, in all the places that we live for whatever period of time we live in them. So ACEnet's priorities, this is what we've been doing to help make this shift to a more localized food and ag economy. Obviously, Appalachian Center for Economic Networks. Yeah, we catalyze networks. We're very focused on anchoring wealth in local control and in local ownership. So pretty much all the tenants within our 2 food and farm enterprise centers, all the folks and clients that we work with throughout the 32 counties of Appalachia, Ohio, the state of Ohio, Central Appalachia. It's predominantly people who are locally, starting either locally owned or operated businesses. Certainly in recent years, we're looking at succession planning and maybe even more co-op ownership, especially as some of these food and ag businesses need to just transition as the family, the owners may need to age out and take it easy. So anchoring wealth, I think, is really important. We don't want outside control, or we want to avoid outside control as much as possible. And then practicing inclusion and transparency. I would urge you to check out acenetworks.org, our website. It will also connect you to a lot of our partners, a lot of our funders. Follow us on social media. I'll have a slide at the end. So we're always trying to spotlight what we and our partners and our stakeholders are doing, because we want to be seen. We want other folks to hopefully maybe rip off some of the ideas, some of the best practices, some of the models that we've been creating. And then that approach to appreciative listening. Again, that's the deepening of respect for our people and our places. We want to leverage investment, but we oftentimes, because of that value of local ownership, we want to do it with community capital. And I'm going to give you some examples here in a minute. And then probably what ACEnet is best known for, again, in my introduction, it was highlighted that ACEnet operates 5 business incubators. 2 of them are shared use food processing, aggregation, and distribution facilities. One in the city of Athens, the Food Ventures Center that's been open and operational since 1996. And then our Food and Farm Enterprise Center, which is about 20,000 square feet in a much larger incubator building in the city of Nelsonville. And I'll talk about those much later this afternoon in our panel. But this idea of collaborative infrastructure and really collaborative systems has really taken off. And we've seen a lot of models grow in the state of Ohio and certainly nationally. So there's a lot of other folks who are doing this work that I would really urge you to connect with. So what does local ownership look like within a food system? Well, certainly it's farmers and ag producers. We're very, again, blessed to have this advantage of our geography, of a history of small family farms. So we have livestock operators, we have poultry, we have specialty crop growers, produce of all varieties. We're seeing, I would say in recent years, more grain production. Again, that huge proliferation of wineries, distilleries, craft breweries is opening up, I think, for many ag producers, new opportunities to maybe operate their own processing facilities in that segment, but also be able to provide the ingredients that those growth businesses are sourcing. And then market partners, it might be locally owned restaurants. Here's the shameless promotion of my own business, Casa Nueva, at the top of the screen. And then food trucks, another very interesting trend over the last 10, 15 years. We have this amazing diversity of food trucks, many of them operating out of our Food Ventures Center because they're elbow to elbow with other processors and agricultural producers. It just is an easy entry for them to source local. And then the one thing I want to say, and hopefully this will not offend anyone too much in terms of your politics, but I think local businesses can give voice to the issues that are meaningful within our communities. This is the George Floyd window that you can see at the bottom of the screen. This is something that CASA, and again, during COVID, not having customers, we were only doing carry out and delivery at this point, put up because we really wanted to acknowledge what's happening, not just in Athens, Ohio, but what's happening across the nation and where we sit in terms of those values. So this is what we want, right, folks? Beautiful generation after generation of family farms. One of my, and not that I have favorites, but one of my recent examples would be the Delaney family farm. Adam grew up in Perry County. He and his wife and kids farm, I think outside of Albany. I don't exactly know what road they're on. And they've been slowly building up their infrastructure. It's diversified. They put up a new sort of farm store on their property last season, again, very much in response to COVID, to connect with customers in other ways than their stall at the Athens Farmers Market or selling to some of the locally owned and operated grocery stores. So, I mean, what happy faces. I mean, isn't that beautiful? And then a lot of farmers in our region have also been really investing in additional infrastructure. So whether it's mushroom cultivation or high tunnels or greenhouses or microgreens, looking at what some of the market opportunities, especially when we build out these local food value chains. If you've ever seen my presentations before, you know that it's really important for me to spotlight the amazing variety of food and farm entrepreneurs we have in our region. So making that shift is really part and parcel of getting folks at all levels to invest in our local food economy. These are some photographs of Snowville Creamery, shameless promotion, I guess, advertisement for the variety of products that they create. Victoria, over the last year, has been able to utilize crowdfunding, grant programs. Most recently, during the COVID year, the Paycheck Protection Program. So, having relationships with your local bank is important, but there's other ways that your customers, your community can invest in these types of food processing or agricultural operations. And then dollars are essential, but social capital is invaluable. So it's getting everyone on board. Some of these pictures are kind of old, but it's one I love. We love our farmers. This was from probably long ago, Real Food, Real Local 30-mile meal event we had at the Athens Farmers Market. So this is Tom Redfern. You might recognize some of you from Rural Action, Paige, our Tourism Bureau director at the time, our farmers, our mayor of Athens, one of our county commissioners, our Chamber of Commerce representatives. So having that sense of how are people connecting? How are we creating relationships with donors directly? How are we building relationships with local philanthropy? And that has been really important, especially around resilience grant programs, family farm fund programs that we've had up and running since COVID. So infrastructure, you'll see more pictures. Here's some photographs of the interiors or some of the loading docks in our Athens and Nelsonville facilities. We'll talk more about those later. And then just the ongoing infrastructure commitment. So one of our close-in partners, Rural Action, they operate the Chesterfield Produce Auction in Morgan County. A lot of their produce comes to our facilities, both in Nelsonville and ACEnet for storage, for warehousing, for distribution at all levels. In 2018, we built out an artisanal meat processing room in Nelsonville, as well as a veg prep room, dedicated room, because we've had such success working with some of our institutional buyers, our K through 12 farm to school initiatives, as well as some of the healthcare institutions and higher eds like Hocking College and Ohio University. So we've had to adapt, certainly in the last year. And I think it's the strength of this network. It's that working at the speed of trust that really makes the difference. So we are masked up and trying to figure out how these pivots can really work. Many of our food truck operators, our caterers, many of our restaurants have now worked with their customers to receive donations and provide feeding programs. With the schools closed, the food insecurity challenges we already face in the region, we had to do a lot of innovation to get food out to the rural people in the very rural places where they don't normally have access. And then, although I sometimes complain about those larger corporate food giants, we have some amazing commitment from locally owned and operated stores, whether they're Siemens Grocery. There's a picture of Rob Phillips from RL Valley Ranch showcasing some of his beef products. You can see the sign in the background. About a year and a half ago, another new locally owned market, Kindred Market, opened up. And they're sourcing, I mean, you can walk down every aisle, you can look in every refrigerated case, you can look in every frozen case they have. There's locally sourced products. So it's really great to have a network with this kind of resilience that even during the pandemic, they have continued to source from local food and farm entrepreneurs, but they've also upped their game to a large degree. Again, I just want to underscore some of the comments from John and the earlier presenters. We've seen a shift, and we've got to make sure that some of this shift sticks. So there's also this trend, certainly in Ohio, it started with local roots up in Worcester about 12, 13 years ago. So we see more cooperatively owned, sometimes by producers, retail operations. Lake to River up in Mahoning County, their retail storefront as well as an online market out of their Commonwealth Kitchen Incubator in Youngstown. Another one of my favorite models, the Keller Market House in Lancaster, Ohio. Again, if you happen to ever shop in that store, you'll see product lines from fresh to meat to dairy to all types of specialty food products, grains, bakery, all coming from a very close radius of Lancaster. And then we've seen more shifts to innovate. And some of this was happening and predated the pandemic. Recently, we had our Athens Farmers Market work with our mall owners here. We lost one of our one of our larger department store tenants in the mall. And now the Athens Farmers Market has both an indoor market December through March in that store, and they're also partnering with the Athens Art Guild. So whether it's CFI, Community Food Initiatives, Veggie Van, the youth entrepreneurs at Hope, one of our housing complexes here for public housing. These are some of the youth entrepreneurs who produce in our kitchen incubator here in the Food Ventures Center. We have SNAP, we have Produce Perks, we have Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Programs, all operating under our farmers markets. So, you know, making sure that healthy, affordable, accessible food is not just for the middle class, it's for everyone in our communities, and coming up with ingenious new ways to get food out and about. So, you know, these are the spark plugs. These are the worker bees, as I like to say, who are making and animating what an equitable local food system needs to look like. So just a couple, I know we're getting close on time, so I'll try and wrap this up so that we have a little bit of time for questions. But, you know, find your people. Notice what you eat every day. Support locally owned and operated food and farm businesses. Many of our communities have food policy councils or coalitions. You know, maybe you want to get closer to the food system by being part of a community garden program, or there's more urban farms popping up throughout Ohio. And if nothing else, you know, connect and repost, share, amp up the buzz of some of the things that are happening. Same thing at the regional level. You know, there's, I think, importance that we have to really monitor what agencies and elected officials are doing. We'll share all these PowerPoints, but, you know, connecting with other partners, maybe outside of your subregion, talking to educators about their role. I am delighted to see Central State now with their extension program. I'm getting to know many of their staff members. So there's, I think, a lot of different ways, especially over this last year, where we see people, even at a regional level, looking for more locally and regionally produced food products. And then at the state level, you know, there's lots of great stuff going on. I would urge you to visit the Ohio Food Policy Network's website, follow their priorities, connect with other statewide partners like the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, the Ohio Farmers Market Network. Again, a little shameless promotion for rural action and community food initiatives. We built this brand program called the 30-Mile Meal, which we've been replicating in other communities, again, as a way to communicate with customers and market partners that there's all sorts of opportunities to eat and source local. So apologies to all the people who have heard me say this a gazillion times, but we are eater owners in our local food economy. We have the power, people. You know, if you want to see food and farm entrepreneurs flourish in your community, you can do it because you are an eater owner. You are voting with your fork or your spoon or your fingers probably numerous times a day. So thinking about, you know, how that fulfilling that need for food to fuel your body every day can make that shift happen is really important. And then there's some shameless infomercial stuff about ACEnet. Follow us on Facebook, probably the best thing. Go to our website, subscribe to our monthly e-newsletter. Yeah, just get to know us a little bit better, because I think it's not about us. It's just a gateway to many of these other partnerships. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. Very great presentation, and every time I hear you speak, you're just boiling down some of the concepts into phrases that are make it very accessible for us, I think. So we really appreciate that. And I'm sorry that we're kind of squeezed on time. But I think I am gonna ask you a question and then see if there's any other urgent questions anybody wants to get into the chat. Please do it. And then we are going to have Leslie joining us later on a panel, so we'll have more time also for questions for her and for her to, interact with our other panelists. So that we're really looking forward to that as well. You mentioned Leslie, the Ohio Food Policy Network. Some of us, I know from Community Solutions and Tecumseh Land Trust, we've been following them and definitely advertising events with them and OFA as well. Could you just say a few words about parts of the state regions that have really clicked, perhaps through their food policy network or grower networks too?
Sorry, I got to unmute. So, I feel like I'm not quite as finger on the pulse now because of the lack of travel over this last year. I see we tend to connect with a lot of the other partners who have developed food hubs and kitchen incubators and enterprise centers. So I see a lot of movement there. Northeastern Ohio, Cleveland has some amazing examples. We probably in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, we've done a little bit of work in Springfield. Obviously, we love to partner with you guys in Yellow Springs and come over and visit whenever possible. There's a lot of interest now, I think, in creating more farm incubation programs. Rural Action has one in Morgan County with the Chester Hill Produce Auction. In fact, I would urge people to go to Rural Action's website. We're doing a 9-session whole farm planning series for beginning farmers. I don't know. There's the folks down in Cincinnati have created some interesting co-op models that I would definitely refer people to. I don't
And
know where.
they've kind of been at that co-op thing in Cincinnati over time, which is really interesting. I'm not really knowledgeable, but I'm kind of beginning to get a better understanding of that. There's another question here I want to throw in that is very relevant from Rachel, one of our organizers of today's event. Um, how did your local growers and farmers do in the COVID era? Did they increase their online sales? How did that go?
Because we work so closely with the Athens City County Health Department, the market was immediately esteemed, I guess, as an essential service. So where a lot of there was tension, again, that creative abrasion that I talk about, where some counties wanted to shut their markets down, we did not. In fact, the Athens Farmers Market just spread out. And if you go to their Facebook page, I would urge you to look at some of their social distancing, some of their protocols. Same with the Meigs County Farmers Market. We've had new farmers markets and pop-up markets start up. One of our entrepreneurs who runs Pork and Pickle, she started a online program called Totes Local, and she's been aggregating product lines from farmers and processors. Probably at this point, a dozen to 18 different food and farm entrepreneurs have joined her online marketing, And she's even been doing delivery up into the Columbus area. I would say we've helped some farmers pivot, update or get a web page, use Facebook as a platform for ordering and sales. So we've helped people do that. But the Athens farmers market per se, to Rachel's question, did not need to do an online ordering platform, and sales have skyrocketed. A lot of our meat producers, livestock operators who sell at both the Athens farmers market and the Meigs County market would be sold out even before the market hours would end.
Yeah, really interesting how the scramble for locally sourced meat and people's willingness to pay more in a lot of instances. We've got a local butcher that Matthew Keener has a butcher operation. CSA was pivoted from restaurant sales to direct sales amazingly well, and even developed delivery service as a part of what he did with restaurant workers, that were laid out. So there's beautiful success stories. I kind of want to just say to all of our audience today, please share, your any of your experiences in terms of what COVID did that could be good, that you hope we'll see perpetuated, in terms of local networking and online, but also food security. I would say that was our experience in Yellow Springs, is we were very attentive suddenly to older people and children especially,
Mm.
who were already food insecure, but we wanted to make sure that whatever they were getting through school lunch programs, and daily contact with caregivers was, something that was going to continue on. So I'm definitely hoping that that's something we can hang on to all over Ohio. Well, I think that we will bring this session to a close and have a break until 1:45. Alex Klug will be your guide to our next couple of panels and facilitator. Alex is also one of the people that has planned and organized this day. And so everybody take a little breather there, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at 1:45. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.